Record, please.
Got her.
Thanks, guys. Okay, and with that, I'm now going to introduce Lois, our National Field Organizer, to talk a little bit about John and his work.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'm the National Field Organizer for Alaska Wilderness League. I'm the liaison with all our members and supporters for helping you get the information you need to take action in your own communities about wild Alaska. And I'm so excited and honored to introduce our speaker this evening, John Rust. He's been a supporter and advocate for wild Alaska and a very good friend of mine for many years. He is a leader with our coalition partner, Isaac Walton League, Minnesota Division, serving as president. And we have worked together on conservation of wildlands in Alaska and locally for a long time. I just want to read a little excerpt I have a copy of his book here, Exploring Wilderness, that we'll hear about tonight. But John Rust has spent a lifetime exploring and living in Earth's most wild places, pristine and primeval, areas where both predator and prey are still found in abundance. He lives in the Twin Cities, and he has always shown that he strongly values caring for the earth. So I just want to say thank you so much, John, for this narrated glimpse into wild places I may never personally see, places that are essence of wild, where predators roam the landscape as freely today as they have in the ancient past. I'm envious and very grateful for your wonderful eyewitness stories. And I hope we'll hear a lot about those tonight. And thank you so much. I'll hand it over to John.
Thank you, Lois. Yeah, you're a very good friend of mine. I appreciate you mentioning that. I do have a deep caring about the environment and, in fact, wildlife and ecosystems in particular. And thank you for the Alaska Wilderness League for allowing me to present and share some of my experiences. I'm very humbled to be here. Uh, the book itself is about adventures in wilderness and wildlife, and in fact, having some close encounters with wolves and bears, jaguar, tigers, and this is not a how-to book. This is a story about adventures in the outdoors and wildlife. I made a lot of mistakes. I kind of am lucky to be here. So this is more of a how not to do it book. uh, because there have been a few times where I kind of screwed up. I didn't know any better. And at least one time I had to be, in a sense, a welfare check, not quite a rescue, but a welfare check. I was overdue and low on food. And that adventure took place in Katmai National Park. I was going the wrong direction on the route I had told my family. Backtracking, I got delayed by storms. I was stuck on shore for 3 or 4 or 5 extra days, and my family saw the GPS coordinates going in reverse direction, and they knew I was low on food, so they sent a welfare check out. And the last 3 or 4 days, I was just eating chocolate covered raisins and a couple crackers, and that was pretty much it. I lost 10 or more pounds. My family said I was kind of gaunt when I returned back to civilization. So you can learn from this book by, this is not how you do it. This is how you can make mistakes and screw up. I love Alaska. I've been to Alaska probably over 20 times, close to 25. I'm from Minnesota, as Lois indicated. But I do have some cousins that live in Alaska, and I've been there many, many times. And I've toured national parks for years and years and years since, well, 1977 or so. And they can be very, very crowded in a lot of the areas, unless you're going to the backcountry. I love car camping. I took my kids car camping for years and years and years, and also backcountry camping. But backcountry camping, you get away from the people. And that's what I really like about Alaska, that it's undeveloped and a lot of Alaska is protected. And that's a hopeful sign. I know that there's some thought that a lot more of the lower 48 states should be protected as well. And Alaska sets the example and that standard in terms of protection, and the ecosystems are being intact with connectivity between ecosystems. I'll tell you a little story that's not in the book. It happened about a year and a half ago. A friend and I were kayaking in Katmai National Park in the backcountry. And we're kayaking down the Savanoski River, and it's a braided glacial fed river. It's very cold water. It's full of silt. And as you probably are aware, Katmai National Park has a lot of Alaskan brown bears. Those are the bears that are similar to grizzly. They're a different subspecies, but they eat a lot of salmon. They get really big and they get really fat. But they are voracious. And down the Savanoski River, my friend kayaked between two islands, two very close islands to each other, and there was a bear on the island to the right. And he scooted between the islands, and he made it fine through okay. And I'm not a great photographer, but this was a awesome photography uh, potential. So I put my paddle down and I took the camera and I started snapping photos of that bear. And it saw me and it climbed up on a log and was looking right at my camera, and I didn't need to zoom in whatsoever. However, the current pulled me between the two islands, and the island on the left was a widowmaker, and I didn't see it because I was looking at the bear, and it smacked me in the head, tipped the kayak over, and I went in the water, lost my camera, lost my iPhone, and sure enough, the bear comes into the river right behind me, and it swims across the two islands and comes to the island on my left. Now it's just 10 feet away, and I'm getting swept downstream by the current, and it's following me downstream to the point where it wasn't quite as deep as it was. I could stand up and pull the kayak away from the brown bear, and then my partner had stopped at another island. We dragged that kayak to the other island and tipped it over, got all the water out. But I really regret not having gotten the photo of that bear because it was so fantastic, and I need to go back and get more photos. I got a lot of photos to share with you. The book doesn't just cover Alaska, it also covers Yellowstone, Southern Arizona, Canada, and at least one excursion into India. I need to thank my son Kyle, who's gone on a lot of kayaking trips with me. He did the heavy lifting. He's a young adult now, but he's been my partner, and my daughter Amy. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my daughter Amy. During one trip, I do a lot of solo kayaking and canoeing. She says, "Dad, don't you think you need to take a spare paddle with?" And I was like, "No, I'll just carve one out of a willow branch if I need to." But then I got to thinking, I think you're right. So I bought a spare paddle and I attached it to my kayak. And sure enough, that very trip, my kayak tipped over a different time than the one I described earlier. I lost my paddle and I got swept away. And thank goodness I had that spare paddle because that saved the day. Since this is an author presentation, I will read a couple excerpts from the book. But the book is written for people that love the outdoors and love wildlife and seeing wildlife and are observers of wildlife. I love wildlife myself, nature and being in the solitude, but I also have kind of like, I like a little bit of adventure. So I like seeing, the bears and the wolves and the predators, the Canada lynx as well. So that creates a little electricity in your experience in the outdoors, and Alaska definitely has that. But the book is also written for people that don't get into the outdoors, and maybe it will inspire them to get into the outdoors. There are a lot of people in the world nowadays that grow up in urban areas that don't have that opportunity. So I'm hoping to bring some of those experiences, those feelings, those evocative situations of those experiences to urban people as well. For those people that get into the outdoors, you'll be able to relate to it. For those people who are more urban and haven't gotten into the outdoors, you'll be able to try to understand what the feeling you get, the solitude, the tranquility, the beautiful scenery that you see in the outdoors. And then the other thing I wanted to convey also is not just the plants and the animals and the wildlife, the predators, the prey, but the value of ecology to other people, just some fundamental, I'm not an ecologist, but some of the basic underpinnings of ecology to people in general, so that they learn a little bit of appreciation of the value of ecology and the ecosystem functions that it provides to humanity. So in that sense, I wanted to make it accurate. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I did have a couple of expert reviewers who reviewed some of the science, or all the science. So Dr. Lee Freilich, director of the Center for Forest Ecology, did the review of the forest ecology, and Dr. Lane Adams, a large mammal researcher for the USGS in Denali National Park, was a reviewer as well. So I spent a lifetime in the outdoors, and I had a lot of stories to pick from, but I wanted to pick stories and adventures that had a little electricity, a little excitement, a sense of adventure. I didn't just want to convey all the tranquility and serenity. I kind of find books like that, like I'd rather be there than reading about tranquility and serenity. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'll show you some of the maps that some of the maps of places I've been to and are talked about in the book. Does that look like it's presented in the right size and format for everybody to see?
That is showing the
Yes.
full map of the state.
Yeah, is that?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so here's Alaska. I've been to a lot of different places, but the places highlighted in this book and in this presentation are Denali National Park, Katmai National Park, and Admiralty Island, which is Kutznuwu. It's the Tongass rainforest down in the Panhandle. Of course, Alaska is a big place. It's not just a single place. You can't just say you've been to Alaska and you've seen it. You've got it's a variety of terrain. It's got forest, tundra, wetlands, lakes and rivers, boreal forests, rainforests. So it's not a single place. There's Kenai Fjords down here that's not highlighted. There's Wrangell St. Elias National Park, along with Kluane National Park down here. The largest non-polar ice field on Earth is in this area down here. If you haven't been to Alaska, you want to get to Alaska at least once in your life. And the quintessential place to go is Denali National Park. It is popular. There are a lot of people, but you really should see the glacial carved valleys. The vistas are so absolutely stunning. The highest mountain, Denali, in North America, 20,000 some, I don't know, is it 20,363 possibly feet in height? You'll see grizzly bears roaming the glacial valleys. You'll see caribou. I've seen Canada lynx in Denali many, many times. So the road is 90 miles. You can take a bus tour on the road, or you can get dropped off from the bus and do some backcountry hiking and camping, which is what I've done. However, about 3 or 4 years ago, because of the melting of the permafrost and ice, there was a slumping of a mountain, and now you can only go about 45 miles out to the road, along the road, not the full 90-mile distance. So the Park Service has got that under construction. It'll be 3 or 4 years before there's a bridge that bypasses that slumping permafrost. Katmai National Park is an awesome wilderness park. The bears there feed on salmon. They get very large. They're unhunted population of coastal brown bears, very similar in size and shape to the Kodiak brown bears, which are pretty famous bears. There's about 2,000 unhunted Alaskan brown bears in Katmai National Park. I've seen a lot of bears there. You'll see some pictures. Canada lynx, there's caribou down here, and there's caribou that roam up and down the peninsula here. And of course, throughout Alaska, there's 32 different caribou herds throughout Alaska. Admiralty Island, my son and I did a trip there. It's a rainforest with old growth Sitka spruce and various other old growth trees. It's about 90 to 95% preserved. And it's a very interesting place there. So the trip that we did to Admiralty Island. We got dropped off here at Oliver Inlet, and then we had to portage our gear along a railway tram to this little Forest Service cabin. And then we kayaked through the Seymour Canal. It's not a canal in the sense of man-made canal, but it's called a canal. There's a congregation of 100 or more humpbacks that congregate down here in the late fall. So that's one of the incentives my son and I had to visit this island. This was our basically pretty much, we were rookies as far as sea kayaking. There's tides that go up and down 10 feet or so. But it is a very spectacular rainforest. It's just a perfect example of the bioconnectivity of different species of life. The plants, the eagles nesting in the trees, the salmon that come in, the bears that deposit into the forest, fertilizer for the trees to grow. The eagles eat the salmon, the humpback whales, the seals. Absolutely spectacular. We are so very fortunate that that's been preserved. There's a small village here. The Angoon live here in a small village here. They've lived there for about 10,000 years. And since this presentation covers the book, I'm going to skip over non-Alaska maps. And here's Denali National Park. You really got to get to Denali National Park. It's got a lot of large glacial features and glaciers. When people climb Denali, they get dropped off at the Kalhitna Glacier, and then they have to trek 18 miles up to the top of Denali and back. I've spent a lot of time in the north side of the park, along the Toklat River and the Wyoming Hills. It's one of the highest areas of golden eagle nesting, highest densities of golden eagle nesting. And there's a lot of Arctic ground squirrels, so that's a lot of what they go after, as well as Canada lynx. And then Katmai National Park, Brooks Camp is this area right here. That's where a lot of people fly into, and they spend a night in a cabin in Brooks Camp, and then they can see brown bears. You can get an iconic photo of a salmon leaping over waterfalls directly into the mouth of an Alaskan brown bear if you're patient. It's a big national park. It's expensive to get to, and the cabins are expensive. But there is an electric fence campground here that the National Park Service runs. And you can safely set up your tent inside the electric fence, which I've done many times. However, I spent a lot of time in the backcountry and been dropped off on American Creek here, and then paddled along Lake Colville through this gap, which is a terminal moraine, and then Lake Grosvenor. And there's multiple routes you can take through Katmai National Park. You can portage to Fury's cabin and then paddle through the Bay of Islands, which is very beautiful Bay of Islands, and then around to Brooks Camp here, and then you can exit. Or when I got rerouted because of flooding, I went down to the Savanoski River, and I had some trouble dealing with the Savanoski River, so I backtracked up to Fury's cabin, 20 miles. That's not the route my family knew I was taking, so they knew something was off. They were very worried about me. I'm not going to give you the spoilers for what happened in some of these things, so I apologize if you feel a little frustrated, like you want to know the end of the story. Well, you're going to have to read the book to do that. Had an awesome experience here in this town of King Salmon. It's about 500 people in the wintertime, and it's a big tourist town. And you would think, well, this is a town, right, with 2 bars, 2 restaurants, an airport, and a few hotels. And well, my family and I, we got dropped off in King Salmon, and it's like, oh, let's have dinner, let's check into the hotel, let's have a beer. And we walked along this little road here, not more than 100 yards outside of downtown King Salmon. And a giant coastal brown bear leaped out of the brush and confronted us. right at this, within 100 yards of town. It was an amazing experience. And we all survived, but it wasn't for sure. And then Lake Brooks, here I mentioned Brooks Camp and Brooks Falls. This is the glacial moraine here created by the glaciers from the last ice age. The electric campground is here at Brooks Camp, and then there's also cabins. And then one of the trips I did some kayaking on Lake Brooks here and here. I didn't have very much experience, and I sat here on this island. It was whitecaps. I was camped here. There was whitecaps coming in. I know I better stay on the island, but you know what happened? There's a brown bear that swam out to the island, and I had to make a choice. Do I stay on this island with this brown bear sleeping overnight, or do I kayak in whitecaps and get away from the island? Okay, I got some photos here. So we're going to do some photos, but before we do the photos, I'll do a quick reading from a couple chapters in the book. This reading is from Katmai National Park. In all my travels, it is here at this confluence that most awakens a sensation deep in my gut that I am in a primeval world. On the horizon are snow-capped volcanoes with glaciers creeping down their slopes. Immediately in front of me is the relentless power of the Savanoski, its braided channels twisting, merging, and splitting, log jams aggregating on gravel bars. Here I am alone in a vast wilderness, sharing existence with two Alaskan brown bears, with a multitude of bear tracks scattered at my feet. I am a small, frail being surrounded by living, breathing predators, alone in the elements, with powerful forces at work. Very carefully, standing quietly, I scan the area. The vegetation is thick and dense. There are willows and alders dotting the shoreline, mudflats and islands. There could be a large bear nearby, hidden by brush. My attention is supremely focused on the here and now. The rest of the world does not exist. It is just me in a wild, untamed wilderness. The 7.5 billion other people on Earth do not exist. Cities and traffic jams do not exist. Electronic communication does not exist. The only communication is the distance my voice can travel, and there is nobody here but the bears to hear it. This is nature, raw and authentic, where rules of wilderness prevail. And that is typical of Alaska. You can be in the lower 48 states, in Yellowstone, in Glacier National Park, but the feeling you get when you're in Alaska, in the backcountry in Alaska, is a bit different than the feeling you get when you're in a wilderness area in the lower 48, because things are so big and vast. And then I got one more passage here that I'll read. Now, this passage is in Denali National Park. All is quiet as I read and nap. After a couple of hours, I peek outside to check on the weather. In view is a large grizzly not more than 50 yards away. It is not facing this direction and may not be aware of my presence in the tent. I wonder how long it has been wandering around nearby. It has a big brown hump on its shoulders and grizzled fur. Fascinated, I silently watch through the tent door, staring at its immense body as it digs up roots. Its head is massive and its snout is pointed toward the ground. It glances in my direction for a moment, then walks across a small side stream. It is digging up and eating the roots of alpine sweet vetch, also known as peavine, which grows along river bottoms and floodplains in the north. This is likely the same bear that I encountered 2 nights ago. This morning, it could have come right up to the tent while I was reading or napping, but it didn't. Or if it did, I was asleep and I didn't wake up. Being concerned, I exit the tent, revealing my presence. Standing just outside the tent door, I speak in a calm and steady voice that catches its attention. The bear looks in my direction. Slowly and deliberately, it turns and walks towards me. Holding my ground in front of the tent, I continue to utter random words using a normal voice. It approaches to within 35 yards. There is nowhere to retreat. Running would induce an impulse to chase. Hiding in the tent would be futile. There are no trees of sufficient size nearby to climb. I am at the humble mercy of wild nature. The bear ambles forward, closing the gap to 25 yards. Standing perfectly still, I hold the pepper spray with my thumb on the trigger. And for the rest of the story, you can find out what happens after that. So I do love Alaska, and it's a big place, and it's not a single place. In comparison to the size of the United States, it spans a great distance. If you see from the north, there's Boro. I actually know a woman. I'm friends with her on Facebook. I've met her in person in Alaska. She lives in Boro, and she is a local. I'm not sure what race or nationality. I'll call it Inuit. That might be it. It might be wrong. They do a lot of traditional living and uh, living off the land in Boro. And down here's Juneau, near Admiralty Island. If you look at Boro in northern Montana and you look at the southern tip of the southeastern peninsula, you're into Louisiana and Mississippi. And of course, the Aleutian Islands go out here far into the Pacific Ocean. And Katmai National Park is down here. Denali is here. So just kind of this figure is gives you a size of the scale of a flight from Boro to Juneau, 1,100 miles. And you compare that to a flight from New York to Orlando. That's the size of Alaska. And some of the ecoregions, this is a very simplified map. Now I want to get to the Brooks Range and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge up here. I'd like to get there. It's on my list of places to experience. Polar bears den along this area, the porcupine, caribou herd calve in this area. They do I think it's a 1,000 to 2,000 mile migration here, circulating yearly. The Bering Tundra, the land of little trees, the Alaskan Peninsula, the mountainous zone of the Alaskan Range here, the coastal mountains and the polar ice fields of Wrangell St. Elias and Logan, are Kluane National Park, with Mount Logan, the second highest mountain in North America. And of course, the coastal rainforest down here along the Panhandle and Kodiak Island. This is a very much simplified map. There's a lot of subtleties here, but this just kind of gives you broad sense. There's even like semi-deserts here in the Quebec Valley, where it gets very little rainfall. And here you can see much of Alaska, thankfully, is preserved or protected, or somewhat protected. Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Gates of the Arctic National Park. Some of my friends have paddled down the Noatak River. Several of my friends have. I'd like to get there. Denali National Park, that's the iconic place to visit if you've never been to Alaska. Kenai Fjords, where glaciers calve off into the North Pacific. Katmai National Park, and then the Panhandle down here as well. Glacier Bay National Parks. So Alaskan wildlife, if you're talking about wildlife, compared to the lower 48, we want to protect wildlife in the lower 48, but Alaskan wildlife isn't necessarily completely protected, but it's such a big and vast place that it has high population of various species. There's 32 caribou herds that migrate throughout Alaska. Some are stationary, they don't all migrate. 100,000 black bears, 7,000 to 11,000 wolves, 4,000 to 7,000 polar bears. And these numbers change, they can fluctuate up and down. Some areas, the state of Alaska will kill wolves to help decrease the pressure on caribou. There's a big hunting of caribou in Alaska. At least a couple of my friends have done caribou hunting. Moose in Alaska. We're losing our moose in Minnesota. The Northwest herd in Minnesota has been depleted from 3,000 to 4,000 down to just 100 or so. In the northeastern portion of Minnesota, they're down to about 3,000 or 4,000 now, but I think they used to be up to over 10,000. We have a few Canada lynx in Minnesota, but Alaska's got 10 to 15,000. They like to eat snowshoe hare, but their population fluctuates in a rhythmic cycle as the snowshoe hare population fluctuates up and down. The Canada lynx population follows the cycles of the snowshoe hare. And then grizzly bears in Alaska. That's the place to see grizzly bears. And since I'm presenting, I want to make sure that people don't just go out and like, hey, this guy John, he went out and did it, he's still here. Well, you want to be cautious, you want to be safe. So Alaska is another thing, as compared to the lower 48. There's about 1 or 2 fatal bear attacks in North America almost every year. It's not a lot, but it's still something to be concerned about. It gets a lot of newsprint because people are intrigued by wildlife hurting or killing people, and it does happen. Here is our dry bag of food hanging above the cut bank edge along Admiralty Island here. That's about 12 feet up. Technically, the bear could come from onshore and maybe somehow get it, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do to keep your food safe. This is a bear container in Alaska that's in Denali National Park. You are required to have a bear-proof container in Denali National Park. In Minnesota, in the Boundary Waters canoe area, they're requiring people to have that because there have been some nuisance black bears in the Boundary Waters of northern Minnesota. This photo is hanging, but this is actually Yellowstone National Park. That's 12 feet up, and they do have the designated campsites, these poles. In Yellowstone, you can also store your food in these food storage containers. They are bear-proof. And this is a photo here of my tent in Denali National Park. And I had to move the tent. I had the tent out in the gravel bar. It was raining so much, it was flooding. And I was worried about having to check in the middle of the night, being swept away. So I had to move it up here. And then it dissipated and the floodwaters went down. And this is my food bear container. Technically, it should be at least 100 yards away. Maybe that's 50 yards or so. But you're supposed to keep it 100 yards away. And that's a dry bag, a blue dry bag that's covering one of these bear-proof containers. So in Alaska, there isn't a lot of cell phone service. You can be driving along major highways and not have cell phone service. So generally, you go into the backcountry, you want some sort of emergency beacon device, satellite phone, or EPIRB, electronic emergency device that's satellite based. I do some solo traveling, so I always take one. Although sometimes I've had it not work and my family doesn't get the signal. So you have to be careful about that. And in Alaska, you want to be bear prepared, and you want to dissuade bears from being curious. Bears eat a lot of vegetation, a lot of grass, a lot of sedges. I've seen gigantic bear scat that is as big as a dinner plate and 7 or 8 inches tall, full of sedges and grass and vegetation. I've also seen bear scat full of salmon. It doesn't have the fibrous content that uh, vegetation does when they eat that. But you always want to bring some sort of bear spray. Flying to Alaska, you can't bring it on an airplane, so you're kind of stuck. You either got to buy it, it's expensive, or in Denali National Park, you can rent it, or sometimes an outfitter will lend you it, and then you give it back, and you save 45 to 50 bucks. Uh, Kayaking Admiralty Island, we had flares. We could signal emergency, or we could light a flare and scare off a bear. I've never brought an electric fence, but this is a solar powered electric fence to keep bears away. Uh, but some people do. And thing is called a bear banger. It it creates a big noise and shoots like a slug at the bear, and it pops. I've never had one of those. They're popular in Canada. But probably the number one thing is make noise. Besides these other things, the number one thing is to make noise, talk when you're in camp. I don't want to make camp uh, late in the evening. I like to get there in the afternoon, establish a presence, and make sure that the bear knows, what local wildlife knows I'm there. Walking through thick brush, you want to always have a mantra. My mantra is, hey there, hey there, hey there. So I would say out of these things in this slide, the make noise is probably the most important thing. And Alaska has cold water. It's not your typical warm water lake. And I always wear my PFD or life preserver. Some people use a dry suit or a wetsuit. I have a dry suit. Uh, when I fell into the river in the Savanoski, I had a dry suit. It was awesome. A spare paddle that saved my life pretty much from having to be rescued. I'm super cautious in cold water, deep cold water lakes. If you got big white caps on those lakes and you're in a canoe or kayak, then you go to shore and you don't cut across the lake. You stay along the shoreline within 100 yards. Cutting across bays is, on a super calm day, is maybe okay, but if you have any question about the weather, you try to minimize your crossing of bays or crossing a lake. Some people are very experienced and they're confident. I'm not an expert in kayaking or canoeing. I'm very, very cautious. So if there's any question, I stay on shore. And then I don't do whitewater river. Some people do. And the water's very, very cold in Alaska. Cold water deaths in Alaska do happen. Hypothermia, you have to be super cautious about cold water in Alaska. So I'm going to skip across some slides here that are not Alaska and go to just the Alaska slides. Although I got to point out, this was 6 wolves here in Yellowstone. I hope you don't mind, Hillary, that I got the wolves in Yellowstone. I just saw these guys in February. That's India. Let's skip that. Okay, wildlife. It was about 120 years ago or so, elephant seals were thought to be extinct. They were all hunted out because of their oil and blubber. And no one knew that there was a small island off the coast of Mexico where there were still 20 to 40 elephant seals. Humanity is very, very lucky that we still have this creature on Earth. And this is a male elephant seal with the females and then the pups. So they do inhabit waters around Alaska, although that flow's not in Alaska. But elephant seals have made a comeback. They were below 50 elephant seals from the small island off the coast of Mexico. Now they're up to over 150,000. And they migrate out to the ocean, and then they come back along the coastal areas and they bear their pups. and then season to season. And so the male elephant seals tend to follow the coastline. I'm not sure why the males do more so than the females. They go all along the Aleutian Peninsula and the Aleutian Islands. You know, just like the sea otters, when the fur traders came to Alaska, they hunted out the sea otters up and down a lot of the West Coast, and there are very few sea otters. But now the sea otters are coming back as well. I'm going to skip this. Some of these are non-Alaska slides, although that's a beaver. You can find beavers in Alaska, but that slide is not from Alaska. That's from the Boundary Waters. Okay, so talking about some of the ecosystem, the blue mussel is part of the ecosystem and the trophic cascade that feeds different species along the waters along Admiralty Island. Sea urchins and starfish will eat the blue mussel. And other things will eat the starfish and the sea urchins, like sea otters. And then killer whales will sometimes go after sea otters. But if the ecosystem is out of balance and the sea urchins if the sea urchins proliferate, they'll not only decimate some of the blue mussels, they'll also eat all the kelp. They're omnivores. So when there's a lot of sea urchins, the kelp forest can be decimated, and it's created a urchin barrens. It's basically something that is just sandy along the floor, and there's no kelp, and therefore there's no structure for all the other species that live in a kelp forest. This is a photo in Denali National Park, and you might not think it's a very particularly interesting photo. This is along a glacial valley in Denali. I was going to go over there. I should have went over there, but I had to cross a creek and would have got my boots wet. But if you see this little black thing here, and then this delta-shaped sand, this is either a bear den or a wolf den. I know wolves will reuse their dens. This one's unoccupied because this is late in the fall. If it was a wolf den, the pups would get born in the wolf den, and then the parents that would go out and bring food back for the pups. And in the lower 48, grizzlies are expanding their range. This is a photo of Katmai National Park, and my tent is probably 10 or 15 away. I'm standing 10 or 15 feet away along American Creek. This is Alaskan coastal brown bear, and it's focused on salmon. It walked right by me, my tent. I have the pepper spray ready and my finger on the trigger just in case I needed to spray it. But I first heard this thing, and I heard the grass swishing back and forth. I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And I just see the grass swishing back and forth. Pretty soon the bear comes by, exposes himself, walks right by my tent, and then just keeps on going along the creek. And this is a bear in Katmai National Park watching me on shore. They do this thing. See how they're wet all the way up to their chin here? But see how the ears are dry? When they look for salmon, they put their whole face under the water, and it's called snorkeling for salmon. And then they can find either expired salmon that have spawned out or live salmon. If it's really deep water lake, it's difficult to catch a swimming salmon. They'll go after expired salmon and eat that, but they prefer living salmon. But they keep their ears above the surface of the water. And the reason for that is so they can hear what's going on nearby. Because not all bears are dominant bears, and the salmon are so prolific that the bears can congregate along streams and creeks. There could be an aggressive dominant bear and sneaking up on a lesser dominant bear, and they can hear that bear coming by through the water by keeping their ears above the surface of the water. Okay, at one point in Katmai National Park, a solo trip, I was really low on food, as I mentioned, and I was tempted to start living off the land. This is Arctic lupine. it generates pea pods that look very much like the edible pea pods that humans consume. However, however much they're in the same family, but these are pea pods that are toxic. Because it looks so much like a human consumable pea pod, I was like, gee, it's got to be edible. But you know what? I didn't eat it. I was glad I didn't, because I get back to civilization and oh no, yeah, don't eat those. This is some of the old growth forest and a cabin on Admiralty Island, the Kootznoe Wilderness. Admiralty Island in the Kootznoe Wilderness, it's known as the Fortress of the Bears. There's about 2,000 Alaskan coastal brown bears on Admiralty Island. My son and I camped here nearby this cabin. It was occupied by uh, state of Alaska game officials. They were doing a survey. However, they were very tense. They weren't friendly to us. And the guy was marching around with a rifle on his shoulder, and the woman didn't want to talk to us. And finally, my son talked to them, and they said, you know what, we're closing up shop here. We have to leave. We were charged repeatedly by a brown bear, and we had to shoot and kill it. And they didn't feel comfortable staying there, and they closed down their project, at least for the time being. So they left and went back to Juneau. Yeah, I'm gonna have to scroll through some of these, but this is, I hate to be a spoiler, but this is the glacial valleys that you see in Denali National Park, glacial carved valleys, and the braided rivers you can see. And this is the tundra here, or yeah, we're above tree line. Tree line in Denali is about 2,500 feet, give or take, with white spruce, black spruce, um, tree line in Colorado is probably around 10,500 feet or so. Tree line in Glacier Park is maybe 9,500 feet. And as you go farther north, tree line decreases in elevation until you get to the boreal Arctic part or the tundra part of Alaska, where no matter what elevation you're at, there are no trees. You just got brush and mosses. Skip that, skip this. I'd love to talk about everything, but I'll stick to, Hillary says I should stick to Alaska, so that's what I'm doing. Okay, these are Dall sheep or thin-horned sheep in Denali National Park. I believe these are female or young ones. The males have a bigger curl to their horns. And that's part of the reason why Denali National Park was preserved, because there were people that loved Dall sheep and hunting them. And to preserve that area, that's part of the reason why it was created. As part of Anlika, if I pronounce that right, much more of Alaska was preserved. And thank goodness that more of Alaska was preserved, because if you're just preserving rock and ice, you're not preserving that much of the ecosystem. So Anlika preserved much more beyond the park proper. This is a bear in the forest of Katmai National Park. It's a huge bear. I was able to get a nice photo of that one. Well, I got to talk about my kayak. When I go to Alaska, I take this folding kayak. It goes into 2 duffel bags, and it can be flown on a bush plane and get dropped off anywhere. So I love this kayak. I kind of cherish it.
Hey, John, can I ask you a question about kayaks specifically
Yeah.
that someone has asked? You were talking about a dry suit. Could you tell folks what the difference between a dry suit and a wetsuit is?
Yeah. Okay. Well, a wetsuit, your skin will get wet. However, the wetsuit keeps the water next to your skin so it doesn't circulate, and your body heat will warm up the water next to your skin. And a lot of people use wetsuits. However, when I tried one, I don't like the clamped on feeling, the tightness of a wetsuit. And if you're not wet, you can kind of get really hot. Whereas a dry suit has gaskets at the neck and at the wrists, and a lot of dry suits have what I'll call like when you're a little kid, you have footy pajamas. They'll have footies on them. I think some dry suits just have a gasket at the ankle. So the dry suit will have gaskets, and it's a waterproof material, and it's not as tight and confining as a wetsuit. So it keeps your clothing dry if you were to take a dunk in the water, and it worked great. The 1 or 2 times that I've been in the water with the dry suit, I was so thankful to have it. However, it's deceptive. A dry suit doesn't provide any warmth whatsoever. So even though the water presses against the dry suit, it will come in contact with whatever clothing you have in your body. So you want to wear warm clothes underneath your dry suit. And I think I sweat less with a dry suit on than a wetsuit. So they're a lot more expensive though, a dry suit is. But when it comes to your life, if you're going to do a bit of activity in the outdoors, especially Alaska, I'd kind of, that's my preference, is to go with the dry suit. Okay, I'm not sure if these are tundra swans or trumpeter swans along the Savanoski River. And this is our tent in the Kootznoowoo Wilderness. Kootznoowoo is the Tlingit word for Fortress of the Bears. This is the rainforest here. My son and I were camped out here in this tent in the middle of the night. We hear some sticks cracking and some branches snapping, and I'm like, we're both reading. We're very quiet. It's a very quiet night, but we hear these sticks crack, and we look at each other. We just smile. And we go back to reading. But then we hear sticks crack again. Like, okay, forget it. But then that happens again, and it's like, I get my boots on, and my son says, "You're not going to go out there, are you?" And I says, "Well, yeah, I am. I'm not going to just sit in a tent and be afraid like a mouse until the bear comes onto our tent and jumps on us. I want to stand up outside the tent so the bear knows there's a living thing here. It's not an animal, it's a human being that stands on 2 legs. And we have to stand our ground because there's no way we're going to run through this forest. It's a steep incline up or down the hill. We're not going to get away from a bear in the middle of the night. So stand outside the tent with pepper spray." But you know what? I looked into the darkness. I could not see anything. But there are things that go bump in the night, and your imagination runs wild. But every time you hear something, some little noise in the middle of the night, you just kind of wonder. But 99.9% of the time, it is nothing to be worried about. But then again, crossing a crosswalk in the metropolitan area, I had a green light with a walk signal crossing a crosswalk, and a big old black SUV cut in front of me and almost hit me. I had to jump out of the way. So there's no safety completely in civilization or wilderness. However, if you do follow all the rules and do take all the precautions, you are going to be much safer if you learn about and follow the precautions in Alaska or anywhere in the wilderness.
Have you used bear spray before, and did it work?
I never had to use it, but at least 3 or 4 times, or maybe more, probably 4 or 5, I've had it out and ready. And like that one in the passage I just read in Denali National Park, I was standing outside my tent. I had the bear spray ready. The bear was 35 yards away and came up to me to within 25 yards. And I just kept talking. But Denali National Park, in the 120 years that people have been going there and it's been designated a national park, no one has ever been killed by a grizzly in Denali National Park except for once. And that was only about 10 years ago or 12 years ago, where that guy, he was an experienced camper, but he kept approaching a mother bear and her cubs with a camera. And he kept bothering them. Well, I don't know if I can characterize the way he acted, but he got within 50 yards. And in Denali, you're supposed to stay away at least 300 yards. Now, I've been in Denali many times when the bears have come to me and walked by my tent, and I always stand outside the tent and say something. I've had a mother bear and a cub walk by my tent, and I say something, and they just quickly amble off. but you don't want them coming up to your tent and them not knowing you're there. So in Denali, I try to set up my tent most of the time, if I can, in an open area that where a bear won't stumble upon your campsite in the middle of the night. But I've never actually pressed the button on the bear spray.
How did you decide about the bear that was on the island with you then what to do? Like what were your decision points? Like,
Well, you second guess yourself. You second guess yourself as to what to do. My experience with kayaking on a cold water lake in Katmai with a bear on the island, I'd only kayaked twice before, and that was in the Florida Everglades where it was very, very warm. And bear in Alaska, a lot of people die from hypothermia and drowning. It's probably one of the number one things that people get. I mean, people fall, they get lost, or they drown and have hypothermia. So I looked at the odds, and I would say I don't know the exact statistics. Maybe I don't know in Alaska, probably is it 20 to 50 people drown every year? I don't know. You'd have to look it up. Uh, then again, only in North America, in all of North America, a bear gets one or two people. So that was my decision point, for better or worse. I said, I'm staying on the island. I'm not going to kayak in whitewater in a high wind, stormy situation. And you know what? The bear swam out to the island. It came to the island. It shook its fur off, got all the droplets of water sprayed off in every direction. I could see its muscle and fur uh, wiggling back and forth. It walked into the brush. And this is a very small island, but it was maybe a couple, 3 acres. I'm not sure, maybe 5 acres. It went into the brush. I never saw it again. And
huh.
then I slept that whole night, woke up, got in the kayak and shoved off. But I'm not saying, every situation is different, and I'm not saying necessarily that was the right decision. Uh, but with my experience with kayaking, I just did not. I mean, some of those kayaks, the cockpit is so tight. It's really hard to get out of the cockpit. Um, and you know, the
That was
kayak I have
interesting
is
to hear
very,
the decisions.
what's that?
It's interesting to see hear how you made your decision. I feel like I can see it.
Yeah. No, if you're super experienced and confident with a kayak, maybe that's another choice to make. He was like, oh, well, we'll just get off the island. But you get off the island and you're still in Katmai National Park. The bears in Katmai will walk by along shoreline. Uh, I've been camping on shoreline and I've had bears walk by my tent. Well, that was my first time in Katmai, but in the 7 times I've been there, I've had bears walk by my tent on shore, within 30 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet, many, 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 many times. And they just walk on right on by. Once in a while, they'll circle around 15 feet away. You know how people have what I'll call a personal bubble in different cultures or societies? North Americans want a little bigger personal bubble. Maybe other people or societies they're more comfortable being, face to face, real close to each other. Well, in Yellowstone, the grizzly bears have what I'll call a bigger personal bubble. They're recommended you stay at least 300 yards away. I think it's in Yellowstone, and in Denali, I think it's 300 yards. When you're in Katmai and you go to bear school for bear etiquette in Katmai, if you go to the campground or the cabin, the rangers make you take a bear etiquette class, and they'll tell you 50 yards and always yield, back away, don't run. So, and in the front country of where Brooks Camp is, the bears are used to people. However, in Katmai in the backcountry, the bears don't see hardly anybody at all. But still, I mean, they see once in a while some people fishing on American Creek, but they're not always familiar with people. And I've seen Canada lynx in the backcountry in Katmai. I was like, it looks at you and like, what are you? I've seen bears on shore in Katmai that are sleeping, kayak by, it raises its head, it looks at you, and it's like, you're not fish, puts its head down and goes back to sleep. But every situation, there are aggressive bears in the backcountry that want to defend their territory. So you just can't assume that everything's safe and sound. There are people that have been antagonized by bears. I think it happened a year or two ago in Katmai and the Savanoski, where a bear kept approaching a fisherman on the Savanoski River. It didn't back down, it just kept approaching until the rest of the party came. I don't remember the result of that, but it was a kind of a anxiety-inducing situation. Well, this was so cute, but this is Yellowstone National Park at Pine Marten. I just had to show that photo. This bear was eating salmon, American Creek. It's huge bear. And this is telephoto lens. I'm trying to kayak up American Creek, get around it. But the creek is fairly narrow, maybe 30, 40 yards, maybe 50 yards at times. So I'm kayaking around an island. I come across this huge bear eating salmon. Is like, well, I want to go upstream, but if this bear were to move into the middle of the creek, coming back downstream, because my intended route was downstream, but I wanted to explore upstream. But coming downstream, I was like, well, if he moves to the middle of the stream, I'm kind of blocked. And then it's really tight corners. So I decided not to go upstream and got the photo and said, okay, we're good to go here. Let's go back downstream. You got your fishing hole. I'm not going to infringe. Oh, that's an ermine in Yellowstone. But okay, you saw this photo. This is Denali National Park. Oh God, I don't know if it's climate change or what, but it was a severe sandstorm was blowing through Denali National Park. My tent blew away, I had to go retrieve it. So I don't stake it down. I just put my gear in and weigh it down. And I hadn't fully weighed it down yet. And that's the bear safe container there.
Hey, John, is there any advice that you have that's different from what you would do to camp on your own, as you're talking about, versus camping with a group of others?
Well, when you're with a group, there's more activity and there's more people talking. So like I was with my two kids in Katmai once, and we put our tent in the soft moss of the forest. And we had done some traveling. We were tired. We were taking a nap. And I hear the logs being jumbled along the beach. And like kind of waking up, I walk out, there's a bear. And the bear was gnawing into our duffel bags and gnawed a hole into the duffel bag. And like, I was telling my kids, hey, wake up. We need some more people out here. And the bear did not walk away. I tried to kind of scare it away. I think I raised a paddle and over my head. You know, the paddle's 6 feet tall. I thought that would do it, but it ignored me until my son walked out of the tent. Said, what's up? I said, hey, there's a bear chewing into our duffel bags. And then with both of us there talking, we both raised a paddle. The bear ambled off. So if there's, I guess you can never recommend going alone, although I've done it a lot, but you know, levels of confidence, levels of experience, and then it's also very difficult to coordinate multiple people on trips. And I just go on so many trips that I don't always want to take the time to work out the hassles of coordinating with other people. Although I do it. And sometimes if their experience level or their confidence level isn't to the same degree, they just kind of freak out. And then it just kind of spoils the trip. Even if we don't actually see a bear or wildlife, they're just totally, they will be continuously anxious about the whole situation. And so if there's difference in terms of advice between solo, well, definitely solo, you would definitely want to bring a satellite GPS because you're so much safer with a group. 3 people in a group, someone gets injured, one person stays with the injured party, one person goes to get help. That can happen, or you can help each other. and you're smarter. When there's multiple people, you're smarter. There's more wisdom, although there can be disagreements. And sometimes the most forceful personality will override the more wise decision making. Uh, or the one that has the highest anxiety, you got to kind of adhere to the person that has the highest anxiety and say, no, we can't do that because I'm not comfortable. So there's that. When you're solo, you you're much more quiet, and you might likely see things, but if you have more eyes in a group, you might see a lot of things as well. And not only you might see things in a group, there's natural history information that can be shared amongst the group, like, oh, I didn't know what that plant was, or I didn't know that willow has pain relieving properties. See, a lot of these are willow along here in this riverbank, willow and alder.
I think we have time. I'm just kind of asking you questions as we go because we're getting
Go
close
ahead.
to our time. And there's one more question that's come in around injuries, which totally is a great question related to what you were just talking about. Have you ever had an injury that you've sustained? And what did you do when you were
Uh,
alone?
I've been fortunate. I've been super fortunate, but not everyone is. I've heard of people dislocating their knee or their ankle, or I think it was once I was in the Boundary Waters and I was on an island in the Boundary Waters, and you know how there could be like slippery moss on the edge of that bedrock. I slipped and fell, and I think I fell down onto the bedrock, and the back of my head bounced off the bedrock. One time in Denali National Park, I was there in April, and I fell and I sprained my wrist. It was a pretty bad sprain. One time I was solo hiking in Saguaro National Park and hiking downhill. I twisted my ankle really severely, and but I had to pack on a 30 pounds. I had to go another several miles down the foothill to get to the car, but it was very painful. But
Hmm.
I've been super lucky. I've heard of people having what's that thing when you have something a particle go through from your kidney to somewhere else, a kidney stone, and they had to abandon their trip. Uh, that
Oh,
person had to leave a kayak adventure in Greenland, or no, that was Norway fjords, I think. I mean, and they had a kidney stone that was extremely painful, but they didn't know what it was until they got to the hospital. Uh, yeah, if you're in the backcountry and you have appendicitis and you don't get rescued, in a day or two, you're going to die, you know. Um, so I've been fortunate. All I've had is small aches and pains and, spraining my ankle, spraining my wrist. I've had a couple rough falls, but
okay.
yeah, no, okay. Well, since we're talking about Alaska, Minnesota used to have caribou in the northern Arrowhead region, but their range historically is regressing, and most of Alaska's caribou range. Caribou are a creature of the north, love them. This is a caribou I had to sneak up on. I was behind a huge glacial, I don't know if it was a boulder or the peak of a mountain sticking out of the tundra, and I snuck up on it, and then I crawled through the tundra brush and behind the brush. And I've done a little bit of deer hunting over the years, being from Minnesota, but this was stalking a caribou with a camera. I got a really nice photo. I was really proud. I crawled through the brush and tundra, get really close. I got the picture, and you know what happened? Okay, it saw me. It went over the side of the hillside down into the glacial valley on the other side of the hill. So I quickly scramble up to the top of the hill, and I could see miles, 2 or 3 miles in every direction. It's rolling tundra, but I cannot for the life of me see the caribou. It's like it just vaporized. It's like it should be visible in that grand vista. Uh, but it was very satisfying to sneak up on a caribou and get a nice photo of it.
Um,
This is a cute picture of a Canada lynx kitten in Denali National Park. this, there was 3 other kittens that had crossed the road, and the mother Canada lynx had crossed the road. This was the straggler. This Canada lynx kitten had never seen tar pavement. So it was holding its paws up like it was prancing because it didn't want to touch the tar pavement.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute.
Yeah.
Quick question of what is the sandstorm in Denali caused by?
Well, you know, I I don't know that you can attribute any one condition to
Okay.
climate change. Uh, there's storms that have happened all the time, and hurricanes and tornadoes and that, but I just had never experienced one in my first time I went to Alaska was 1993, 94. I'd never experienced one that bad before. So I can't say, but if you have a dice and you throw the dice and you get one, you get six, and you get five, and you throw it 1,000 times and you get, well, what's 1/6 of, you get 1/6, 1/6, 1/6, 1/6. Every combination is like it's a dice that's evenly loaded across all faces. However, with climate change, that loads one of the faces of the dice, so it occurs more often. So if you get the sixes and it happens more than 1/6 of the time, you can't say any one throw was because of climate change. But if you're getting more than what's once one divided by six, is that one divided by six
I think we get the
is,
idea though. We're
yeah,
saying things are not looking random.
yeah. And Alaska is one of those places where the Arctic feels the change of climate more than more southern latitudes.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that ratio of impact has just recently been discovered to be even more increased than initially it was.
Yeah. Well, that road, the Denali Park Road, has been there for a long time. I don't know how many years or decades, but now the permafrost is slumping, and it caused a mudslide, and the road is out at mile 47. Here is permafrost that's melting. The top layer of the soil melts, but there's still permafrost underneath, and then it has nowhere to go. The meltwater just runs off.
So John, we're starting to get a little bit of like beyond our time. Oh my gosh, that bear is so cute. So just wanted to give you a heads up that we might want to pick a couple more photos and then maybe you could share a few additional ones that we can put in the notes that we can send out to people.
Yeah. Well, this is what you call a cute bear. I was kayaking up. I saw a raven on a branch on the shoreline. I kayak up to the raven on the branch. No, that's not on a branch. That's on the antler of a moose. It's a dead moose in the shallow water. That's a raven on a antler. Oh, wait, that's a dead moose. Might there be something protecting that moose? You don't want to be infringing on the food supply of Alaskan brown bear, but they'll protect their food source.
Mm.
So I backed up and I paddled backwards. So I looked along the shoreline, and to the left of the dead moose, there's a trail worn into the side of the hill. I follow the trail up with my eyes, and there's a sleeping dead bear. Actually, if you look closely, I think his eyes open. But that's what's so great about kayaking. You don't have a motor. You can you can you cannot disturb the wildlife because you're silently paddling. But that I could have kind of made a tense situation there, but he was so full of food that he didn't bother. Lion's mane jellyfish, Admiralty Island. I think that's a lion's mane. I'm not certain, but that's my best guess. Another bear, salmon fishing in Katmai National Park, Canada lynx in Katmai National Park. This lynx stood there and watched us in a kayak for 5-10 minutes. Blackback woodpecker, Katmai National Park, Katmai National Park, common mergansers. I love how they run on the water. Canada Lynx tracks in Denali National Park, caribou shed in Denali National Park. And that's the photo on the book. I was at this campsite and a mother bear and a cub came walking by close. I stood outside the tent and said, hey there, and then they just walked backwards. But this is the type of scenery you see. It's spectacular.
Absolutely
Another
beautiful.
caribou. I'll try to quickly. And if you get to Denali, a lot of people love to see the mountain, the highest mountain in North America. Denali, the Athabascan language term for the high one. Does anybody know what this is? This is Denali National Park. It may not look spectacular, but you go hiking along Denali and see how the tundra is all torn up. This is a grizzly looking for ground squirrels. And look how much it's torn up. They can dig
Oh,
holes
wow.
3 feet deep and 6 feet around looking for ground squirrels. This is the bear that came by my tent in Denali, and you can't see the cub. And these bears were another trip. I was reading on, let me think, I can't remember what river. It might have been the Toklat River. Silently reading, and this steep talus slope here is behind my back. I hear the rock tumbling down. As I'm not thinking about it. But then I keep hearing this rock tumbling down, and these bears come down right behind me, mother bear and two cubs. And I was like, I was getting kind of nervous because they could have came down the hillside from anywhere, but they decided to come down the hillside right behind my back. They get down to the bottom, and I backed up and quickly scrambled away. And then they went the other direction. Here's your food source for grizzly bears, uh, golden eagles, Canada lynx. They're pretty cute, but they're at the base of the food pyramid for a lot of these creatures. Arctic ground squirrel. That's the view outside my tent. So I think we're going a little over. I could talk for a long, long time, but I think you guys got a lot of, okay, here's a ptarmigan. Now, this is in April in Denali National Park. This is a perfect example of how changing the feathers, or I think it's called molting, how it molts from plumage white to brown. So the brown on the neck in the springtime blends in with the alder brush in the background. And then the white hasn't molted yet. And it's almost amazing how the neck lines up with the brown, the camouflage in the background.
That is an
So
awesome picture to show that.
yeah, I'm open for any questions, and I'll just slowly scroll if there's additional questions.
I'm just looking through here. I feel like we got most of them. One person asked about any experience you have with a personal locator beacon.
Yeah, I used to carry EPIRBs, but now I just carry emergency beacons that are basically waterproof. But yeah, EPIRB, uh, yeah, back in the day, a long time ago, that's what I had because they're waterproof and I think they
Uh-huh.
float. I don't know. Some of them, I don't know if they activate if they get wet or not, but they'll float and they'll send a signal. But those are more marine devices.
Well, I feel like we've gone over a good amount of time and we've covered some pretty much all the questions in the chat. I want to let you know that there's some interest in your you talking about your India adventures as well. So that is out there, but I think we're far enough over that we probably need to call it an evening. Um, if anyone has further questions, feel free to email us at membership@alaskawild.org and we can absolutely convey your additional questions to John. And John, thank you so much. This has been an amazing time looking at all of your photos and hearing about your experiences. I feel like I know way more about how to behave in bear country in Alaska than I did before this webinar. So thanks for that. And thanks everyone for your participation tonight.
Well, what's the saying? There's a kind of a well-known saying, and this is the geography of hope. And Alaska is, well, it's the last American frontier, but if you don't consider space or Mars, but I'm never getting to Mars in my lifetime. Maybe my grandchildren will, but I can't imagine anyone living on Mars inside an enclosed, you know, enclosed places. I like the great outdoors, and nothing will compare to nature on Earth here. This is our home planet, and what's the saying? It's like in wilderness is the salvation of the world. Is that the correct quote for that?
I'm not sure, but it works for me. It's
Okay.
certainly a good one.
Yeah, yeah, and I
Especially,
really appreciate Hillary and Lois and everybody who attended, uh, listening to the presentation. Got any more questions? Just send me an email.
thanks so much. Take
Yeah,
care.
thank you so much, John.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to
Good
be here.
night.
Take care.